Hello and welcome back to another Old Man Watches. And today we are going to be talking about Reds from 1981, which, as you can see, was nominated for 12 Oscars. It won Best Director for Warren Beatty or Beatty. I'm not sure how you say his name. Warren Beatty. Beatty, Diane Keaton, and Jack Nicholson were all nominated for Oscars as well, though they didn't win. So, very successful film, critically speaking. Less successful financially, though I think it did okay. It's a biopic, so it's depicting real people, real history, and I want to preface everything by saying I'm talking about Reds through the lens of a work of cinema, not through the lens of a historical work. So when I talk about what works and doesn't work in this movie, and it's mostly going to be what works, I'm talking about what works through the lens of this is a work of cinema, not through is this historically accurate. I think it's important to preface everything by saying that. I'll probably mention it again when I get to certain things. But I think it's really important to say I'm talking about this as a work of cinema, as a film, not as a work of history. So, bit of preface about what Reds is. Reds is a biopic about John Reed, who was an American journalist, best known for writing 10 Days That Shook the World, a first-hand account of the communist takeover of power in Russia, what was then Russia and obviously became the Soviet Union and is now Russia again. Reed was an avowed socialist himself, and I believe he is still the only American to be buried in the Kremlin. His book was seen as a very important way of getting out a communist-friendly view of what was happening in the Soviet Union immediately after the communist takeover. So it's a depiction of Reed's life and of the life of Louise Bryant, his wife and lover first, later wife, who was also a journalist and who was actually in Russia before Reed. Reed joined her there. So all that said, it's a biopic about John Reed, his life, his career, and the events that he and Louise Bryant witnessed and went through. So what's it got in it? What makes this movie work? Because it does work, in my opinion. What are the key features that are worth talking about? Without going into a great deal of detail about the plot and the story, because as I said, I'm not judging this in terms of the authenticity or accuracy of the events. I'm judging this as, is this a satisfying work of film? So first of all, I want to talk about the fact that this film shows rather than tells. So it's an old adage, show don't tell. It's bad writing to have the omniscient narrator in a book just tell you stuff. This was a bad man. He was bad. No, show the person being bad or whatever it may be. And this film is good at showing. It's good at giving you stuff that tells you things. Without just kind of having somebody didactically tell you either worst of all in an omniscient narrator, but even with just characters telling you stuff, which happens a lot in films. We often see informed attributes in films where characters continually tell you, things. Oh, this character is so brilliant, but we never actually see the character be brilliant, for instance. And as an example of what Reds does, it begins with a scene where Reed is on location in basically a war zone, and he sees a bunch of soldiers roaring off towards where the action is, and he chases after them and scrambles up onto the vehicle with them and covers the action. And towards the end of the movie, there's a scene where the Red Army is scrambling, and heading off to engage with something, and he chases them and he fails to catch the vehicle. And the movie never comes out and says, contextually, at this stage that his health is suffering and that he's in the twilight years of his life, but the movie doesn't, heavily, the movie does tell you that, but it also has this scene which shows you that, the man who, before he always got the story, he's no longer able to get the story, and it shows his decline as well as telling you about his decline. So I think that's a nice piece of storytelling that the film does. The second thing that the film does is it shows character growth and character arcs. So again, I'm talking about whether this works as a work of cinema, not whether this is a true-to-life depiction. I personally think Louise Bryant was a better, more balanced, more thorough writer and journalist than John Reed was. But I'm going to talk about her character arc in the film. I don't know if this is a true reflection of Louise Bryant, the person, but her character arc in the film is very much one of talented amateur and dilettante who becomes a very professional, methodical, dedicated journalist and writer. And the film shows you that growth of her. And part of that comes from her relationship with Reed. Part of it comes from her relationship with another man. But a big part of it is coming from Bryant herself. And so we see, not just in Reed, we see obviously Reed's story arc and life, because this is a biopic about Reed, but we also see Louise Bryant and her growth as a person within the context of the film. Again, not saying that this is what actually happened in real life, just saying that as a work of film, this is well executed, taken from that lens in this movie. And finally, the third thing that this movie does that I like is that it operates on more than a single level. So I talked earlier about the scene where Reed, at the beginning of the movie, chases the vehicle, manages to get on it. At the end of the vehicle, chases the vehicle, doesn't manage to get on it, and we're seeing Reed's physical decline. That scene also works because in the context of the film, it's also a depiction of the decline of the idealism of the communist movement. So we see, Reed obviously was an avowed socialist, positive about socialism, positive about communism, and the film, depicts people who are hopeful about the promise of socialism and communism, and I think that's a good thing to be. A good thing to be hopeful about is the idea of, trying to have a more equal society and give everybody a voice and treat everyone, fairly and equally. I mean, obviously, in practice, lots of problems with the Soviet Union as a state. And that's something that the film is showing here. Reed's decline and the decline of idealism and chasing the dream within the communist regime in Russia is shown in parallel in that scene. We're not just seeing Reed's decline, we are seeing the loss of innocence and the loss of ambition to be a better society in Soviet Russia in that scene. And so I like the way that the movie works on more than one level in scenes like that. It's a well-constructed film. Beatty got to it. This was a passion project for Beatty. He got to do it because of the success of Heaven Can Wait, a film that he wrote and directed. It was a massive financial success. Not a bad movie either. And he got to do this. This was a real passion project for him. And he succeeded, I think, in making, I think perhaps the movie is a little bit long. If we're going to talk about weaknesses, I think it's a little bit longer than it needs to be, perhaps. It's not full of action and excitement. It is a thoughtful film. It is a drama. It requires some kind of, attention. So, it's not going to be to everybody's tastes. But if you want a thoughtful film about an important part of history, it's worth checking out. I think it's really well executed. Which puts it at considerable odds with the next movie that I'm going to talk about, which will be 1953's Phantom from Space, which is every bit as good as that picture might make you expect it to be, which is to say, not very. But that'll be next time. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you come back next time for the next one.